55 years ago in Burlington, Vermont, just after midnight on a warm summer night, Beverly had been out at a bar with her roommates when she finally came home and made her way down the hallway toward the bedroom she shared with her friend Rita. The door was slightly open. She pushed it wider. What she saw on the floor stopped her cold. Rita Curran was lying on her back, motionless. Her nightclothes had been torn from her body. Her face was swollen, beyond recognition, caked in dried blood. Her hair curlers, the ones she had put in before going to sleep just hours earlier, had been ripped from her head and thrown across the room. The curtains had been torn from the rods. The bed had been shoved away from the wall. Beverly screamed. Her roommate Paul came running. He pressed his fingers to Rita's neck and felt nothing. She was cold to the touch. He told Beverly to call for help. Within minutes, 2 members of the Burlington Fire Department ambulance crew arrived at 17 Brooks Avenue in Burlington, Vermont. They took one look at the scene and immediately called the police. This was not a medical emergency. This was a murder. Detectives arrived and began working through the night, carefully bagging and cataloging every piece of evidence they could find. They photographed the blood spatter on the walls, the torn clothing, the scattered hair curlers. They outlined Rita's body on the floor in blue pencil. And then, when the medical examiner gently rolled her body to examine her back, they found something lying beneath her right elbow. A single cigarette butt, a Lark brand, charcoal filter tip. It had not been crushed or stubbed out. It had simply burned down to nothing and gone out on its own, its ash still resting quietly on the floor beneath her arm, right where it had been dropped. That tiny, almost insignificant piece of tobacco and paper would sit in an evidence bag for more than 50 years. And when it finally gave up its secret, it would lead investigators to an answer nobody expected, and a truth far darker than anyone could have imagined. But before we get there, tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and if you are new here, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a story. The year was 1971. America was still deep in the Vietnam War. The Pentagon Papers had just been leaked to the press. The voting age had been lowered to 18. Protest songs played on the radio, and tie-dye shirts were everywhere. Life felt like it was changing fast, and young people all across the country were stepping out into that changing world for the first time. In Burlington, Vermont, that world was smaller and quieter. Burlington was a modest, close-knit city, nestled on the shore of Lake Champlain, flanked by the green sweep of the mountains to the east. The University of Vermont gave it a youthful energy, and its streets were filled with students and young professionals building their lives. It was the kind of place where people did not lock their doors, where a woman could put her hair in curlers, climb into bed, and feel perfectly safe. That was the Burlington that 24-year-old Rita Curran stepped into when she moved out of her parents' home for the very first time in the summer of 1971. Rita had spent her whole life in the nearby town of Milton, just 25 minutes north of Burlington. She was the oldest of 3 children, a quiet and deeply faithful young woman, raised in a strong Catholic family. She had attended a private Catholic girls' school where she sang in the choir and served on the student council. She went on to earn her degree at Trinity College in Burlington and became a second-grade teacher at Milton Elementary School. She was the kind of teacher children remembered for years. In her spare time, Rita sang with a barbershop quartet called the Champlain Echoes. She attended church, taught Sunday school, and spent most of her free time with her family back in Milton. She was shy and self-conscious, described by people who knew her as almost painfully reserved. She was petite, barely 100 pounds, with reddish-brown shoulder-length hair. During the summers, she worked part-time as a chambermaid at the Colonial Motor Inn in Burlington and was also taking graduate classes at the University of Vermont. That summer, she had finally decided it was time to live on her own. She found a listing in the classified pages of the Burlington Free Press. 2 female roommates. Needed. Large apartment on Brooks Avenue. Summer only. She called, she visited, and she moved in. She shared a bedroom with a woman named Beverly. 2 other roommates, a young couple named Paul and Carrie, had the other room. Rita did not know any of them well. She was still spending most of her weekends back in Milton with her family. She had even quietly confided to her mother that she was thinking of moving out, something about one of the roommates that made her feel like she did not quite fit in. She had only been there about a month. She would never get the chance to leave. On the evening of Monday, July 19, 1971, Rita finished her shift at the motel. then headed to barbershop quartet practice. She got home around 10 at night, told Beverly she was going to bed, put her hair in curlers, changed into her pajamas and housecoat, and fell asleep. A little while later, Paul called the apartment and invited Beverly to join them for a drink at a local restaurant called the Harbor Hideaway. Beverly went. Rita slept on, alone in the apartment, in an apartment where nobody locked the doors. Between 11:20 that night and 12:30 the following morning, someone entered that apartment. They moved quietly through the dark rooms and found Rita asleep in her bed. What followed was an act of savage violence. Rita fought back. Despite weighing barely 100 pounds, she scratched and clawed and struggled with everything she had. Detectives would later describe it as a vicious fight. But she could not overpower her attacker. He beat her face until it was almost unrecognizable, sexually assaulted her, and then strangled her to death. When Beverly came home and found her just after 1 in the morning, it was already far too late. The investigation that followed was among the most thorough Burlington had ever seen. Detectives worked around the clock. They interviewed hundreds of people and chased hundreds of tips. They talked to neighbors, friends, colleagues, and anyone who had been near the apartment that night. They collected blood samples, hair, nail scrapings, sections of flooring, and door frame. A team of FBI technicians was brought in to help process the evidence. The district attorney handling the case was a young lawyer named Patrick Leahy, who would go on to serve 48 years in the United States Senate. He would later say it was one of the most brutal crime scenes he had ever witnessed, and that Rita's family stayed in his thoughts for years. Among the neighbors interviewed were a married couple living 2 floors directly above Rita's apartment. The husband, William DeRoos, told officers that he and his wife had been home all night. They had not heard a thing. His wife, Michelle, confirmed the same story. DeRoos had a prior criminal record, but his alibi held. Detectives noted his name and moved on. The list of suspects grew to over a dozen names. Polygraph tests were administered, leads were followed, and one by one they all dried up. Years passed, then decades. Rita's case went cold. One name, however, kept circling back. In the mid-1980s, a retired FBI agent named John Bassett raised the possibility that the killer could have been Ted Bundy, one of America's most notorious serial killers. The connection was not as far-fetched as it sounds. Bundy had been born in Burlington at a home for unwed mothers just half a mile from the motel where Rita worked. His crimes bore similarities to Rita's case. There were even municipal records showing that someone named Bundy had been bitten by a dog in Burlington during the very week of the murder. Rita's sister Mary was so shaken by the possibility that she wrote a letter directly to Bundy, who was then on death row in Florida, asking if he had killed her sister. The FBI responded on his behalf, saying only that Bundy had declined to confirm or deny any involvement. And on the morning of January 24, 1989, just 45 minutes before his execution, a prison official asked Bundy directly about Burlington, Vermont. Bundy said no, nothing there. Burlington police kept him on their suspect list anyway, unwilling to let the thread go entirely. But without evidence placing him in Burlington that summer, the Bundy theory remained just that, a theory. And so the case sat. Years turned to anniversaries. Anniversaries turned into decades. Rita's father died in 1991, never knowing who had killed his daughter. Her mother followed in 2002. The reward? Money grew. The headlines faded. By the 50th anniversary of her death in 2021, Rita's surviving siblings released a statement that was equal parts heartbreak and resignation. They wrote that after 50 years, they had to accept that a resolution in their lifetimes was not going to happen, that whoever knew what happened that night would take that information to their grave. They asked God to have mercy on that person's soul. They had no idea that the answer had been sitting in an evidence bag the whole time. In 2014, a Burlington detective named Jeff Beerworth decided to do something with that evidence bag. He packed up the cigarette butt, nail scrapings, and other items from the scene and shipped them to the New York City office of the chief medical examiner for DNA testing. The lab was able to extract a full male DNA profile from the Lark cigarette butt. It was a clear, usable profile. They entered it into CODIS, the National Criminal DNA Database, used by law enforcement agencies across the country. No match came back. The working theory was that whoever smoked that cigarette had never been convicted of a felony and had therefore never had their DNA entered into the system. The 13 men on Burlington's suspect list were tested one by one. Each one was eliminated. The roommate, Paul, was tested. The first responders were tested. Everyone was ruled out. The cigarette held its secret a little longer. But here is where the story takes a turn that even the detectives did not see coming. The reason that cigarette DNA had no match in the system was not simply that the man had never committed a crime before. The real reason was something that would feel like an injustice, and it would only become clear once investigators found out exactly who this man was and what he had done after leaving Burlington. In 2019, Burlington detective Lieutenant James Trebe reopened the case with a new approach. Rather than assigning a single detective to quietly work through the old files, he assembled a full team, brought in forensic experts and technicians, and decided to treat the murder as though it had happened yesterday. Every piece of evidence was re-examined. Every option was put back on the table. The team's focus turned to a technique that had only recently become available to law enforcement: genetic genealogy. Unlike a standard DNA database search, genetic genealogy works by comparing an unknown DNA profile to profiles submitted by ordinary people to ancestry websites, then using traditional family tree research to trace possible relatives of the unknown contributor. It was the same science that had cracked several other major cold cases around the country in the years before. In 2022, the cigarette butt was sent to Parabon Nanolabs in Virginia, where a specialist named C.C. Moore went to work. Using genealogy databases where users had opted in to allow law enforcement comparisons, Moore began building family trees from the DNA matches that came back. Within a matter of hours, 5 of the closest genetic matches in the database all pointed toward the same family. The connections ran through both the maternal and paternal sides of the tree. Multiple generations, multiple ancestral lines, all converging on one name: William DeRoos, the very man who had told police on the morning of July 20th, 1971 that he had been home all night and had not heard a thing. To confirm the finding, detectives tracked down a living half-brother of DeRoos who cooperated fully and provided a DNA sample. The results were decisive. There was a 97% probability that he and the unknown contributor of the cigarette DNA were half-siblings. And then came the final piece: the DNA found on Rita's torn housecoat, the one ripped from her body during the attack. It matched the DNA on the cigarette butt. William DeRoos had not just smoked a cigarette near that apartment building. His DNA was on Rita's clothing. He had been in that room. There was only one problem. William DeRoos had died in 1986. He had been found in a San Francisco hotel room, dead from a drug overdose at the age of 46. His body had been cremated. He would never face a courtroom. Detectives pressed on. They tracked down DeRoos's wife, Michelle, who had long since changed her name and moved to Oregon. When they sat down with her more than 50 years after the murder, she finally told them the truth. She and William had argued on the night of July 19, 1971. He had gone out for a walk to cool down. He had not been home. When police came to the door the next morning, William had pulled her aside and told her to say nothing about him having left the apartment. His criminal record, he said, would make him an easy target. She had believed him. She had been young, newly married, and deeply in love, and she had believed every word. After the murder, the couple drifted apart. William moved suddenly to Thailand, where he eventually became a Buddhist monk before being stripped of that status. Michelle followed him months later. Eventually, she returned to the United States alone and had to hire a lawyer just to obtain a divorce without his signature. Investigators also found a woman who had married DeRoos in 1974. Her account of him painted a picture that was anything but the quiet Buddhist he had presented himself as. In one incident, while sitting with friends, DeRoos had pulled out a large pocket knife and stabbed a woman in the abdomen without any warning or provocation whatsoever. In another, he had grabbed his wife by the throat and strangled her until she nearly lost consciousness, again for no apparent reason. Both times he showed no remorse, as if the violence meant nothing to him at all. And crucially, Rita's former roommates, Paul and Carrie, confirmed that they had never met DeRoos. He had had no reason to be in their apartment, let alone in Rita's bedroom. The Burlington Police Detective Service Bureau was unanimous. William Richard DeRoos, the man who had lived 2 floors above Rita Curran on Brooks Avenue, the man who had lied to police with his wife at his side, The man who had slipped out of Burlington and spent the rest of his short life moving between countries, marriages, monasteries, and cheap hotel rooms was the man who had beaten, violated, and strangled Rita Curran to death on the night of July 19, 1971. In February of 2023, detectives sat down with Rita's surviving siblings, Thomas and Mary, over lunch and told them everything, every detail. Every question they had ever had was finally answered. A few days later, on February 21, 2023, Burlington police stood before cameras and microphones and announced that Vermont's oldest cold case was officially closed. Rita's sister, Mary, spoke at the press conference. She said that 2 generations of her family had grown up never knowing Rita, but Rita had never been forgotten. She never would be. And it was that cigarette, that single Lark cigarette, dropped beside a woman who had fought for her life with everything she had, that finally brought her killer into the light. What do you think should happen to Michelle for providing a false alibi to the police on the night of the murder? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoy videos like this, please give it a like and subscribe so you do not miss the next one.